Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. Borussia Dortmund finally lose a game in the Bundesliga, shockingly at the hands of Dusseldorf. How did Dusseldorf do it? Where did Dortmund go wrong? Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, we're going to break down how Dusseldorf beat Dortmund. So before we get into today's video, don't forget to give our video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it. The bell below does give you daily notifications regarding our organic, unfiltered soccer/footy analysis. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In today's video, we're going to break down the first half, see how Dusseldorf were able to go into halftime up 1-0 and why Dortmund struggled to create chances. Then get to the second half, see why Dortmund failed to rescue a point and how Dusseldorf were able to hold on. But first, let's get to the starting lineups. We look at Dusseldorf, more of a 4-5-1. It was supposed to be a 4-2-3-1. They had Lukebakio up front, out in the wider areas, Usami and Zimmer, and in midfield with Fink, Stoger, and Sobotka. Then we get to Dortmund. No real surprises in terms of the shape, but they did go with Mario Götze up front, just ahead of Royce, out in the wider areas, Brun Larsen and Pulisic, and in midfield, Witsel and Delaney. So now, let's look to see how both sides look to approach the game and how Dusseldorf were able to frustrate Dortmund in the first half. So we break down the game, we look at the first half, Dortmund having loads of possession, Dusseldorf dropping off, but it did play into their hands based on the fact that when you look at how Dortmund have scored goals this season, they've struggled to break down sides that sit a bit deeper, that are very organized, and have a legitimate counterattacking threat. Dortmund like to play on the opposite hand, where they like to play on the break. They have transitions springing through Royce. That wasn't an outcome here. They were forced to break down the host, and they struggled throughout based on the fact that they didn't have a legitimate striker up front and they couldn't get in behind or find spaces between the lines to really operate. Why was that? Well, the way that Dusseldorf dropped off was they kept their 4-5-1. You had Götze dropping off, but they had the 2v1 there. So if Götze dropped off, they could push a center back out to him to hold them off. Whereas when you look at the midfield, that was the key thing here. Throughout the season, we've seen Witsel, Delaney, Dahoud get time on the ball to spray passes, their ability to really dictate the tempo of the game and really orchestrate how Dortmund are going to build attacks. Here, that wasn't the case. You had Fink dropping to Delaney, stepping to Delaney. You had Stoger stepping to Witsel, and then you had Sobotka really focusing on Royce. That did change throughout the game based on Royce's movement. We eventually saw Stoger drop off a bit deeper. We saw Sobotka push a bit higher, trying to get to Witsel if he did push into those spaces, but they did interchange throughout. So each player knew that they had to stick to one man. We saw Royce push out a bit higher, and if it was Stoger or Sobotka in that position, they were following him, and they just ensured that they stuck to their man. There was pressure on the ball, and Dortmund really couldn't create chances there because they couldn't get anything through Götze. They couldn't really find anything through the center of the pitch because of how organized this Dusseldorf side was. In wider areas, they had Zimmer, who is a natural right back, just ahead of Zimmerman. So he was protecting that side. And on the opposite flank, Usami did a good job as well. Piszczek wasn't looking to push forward. You could have Schmelzer pushing forward because Larsen was very narrow. But again, he was also marked out of the game. And Pulisic was forced to drop off a bit deeper as well. So Pulisic dropping off deeper, that just created more space for Dusseldorf to protect, and that really helped them out as well because he was ineffective throughout. So when you look at that and you look at all the options that are being negated based on the fact that they're so organized, so compact, it was basically Akanji and Diallo who had a lot of time to push forward, to play positive passes, but that didn't really play into their hands because if they're stepping forward, that creates space for Lukebakio to drive into, and with the fullbacks a bit higher, that also created spaces into the channels for him to spin into, and with his counterattacking threat coming off a performance that they did see against Bayern Munich earlier on in the season, that should have been something that they were aware of, but that wasn't the case here. But like I said, Dusseldorf just very organized in midfield. They stuck 3v3 throughout. They had protection for the fullback, so there were never overloads in wider areas. And when you have Mario Götze dropping off and you have the 2v1, there's no real threat there. Really, when you think about it, Borussia Dortmund's best chance stemmed from Pulisic dropping off a bit deeper. And this was one occasion where Larsen really tucked in and tried to create an overload, moving over to the right-hand side. He ran off Sobotka. The ball bounced off him and fell to Götze. Götze unmarked. It was a mistake. And he was very fortuitous. this, it falls to him, but he fired a tame effort at the keeper. But besides that, Dortmund never really troubled the host throughout in that first half. So now when you think about it, how did Dusseldorf go into halftime up 1-0? What did they do right? So in the next clip, we're going to get to that and see why Borussia Dortmund struggled and how Dusseldorf were able to expose their weaknesses on the counterattack. So the key to Dusseldorf's success in the first half stemmed from Lukebakio's pace up front, the fact that Fink could win aerial duels, and their defensive organization. When we look at some of their chances, it stems from that because what they did was that with them being so organized in wider areas at midfield, it forced the center backs to step forward to try and take initiative. We look at one of the first chances, it's Akanji stepping forward, trying to find a pass into Royce, but Stoger is able to intercept it. It leads to Usami picking up the ball and clipping it into that left channel. What happens is that with Akanji stepping forward, that leaves space for Lukebakio to break into. As he breaks into that channel, get the ball, he's able to run 1v1 with Akanji. He cuts in, he cuts out. Akanji's able to get a piece of it, and he fires a shot into the path of Berkey. But again, it's a warning sign to show that that pace is there, it's legitimate, they have to be worried about it. A few minutes later, it's Diallo this time stepping forward, and with Diallo stepping forward, he tries to find Bern Larsen, who does try to run off Zimmerman. What happens there is that because he's playing so narrow, he tries to run off Zimmerman, but the pass doesn't connect, and what we see there is that Zimmerman's able to intercept it. And then from there, you have Fink, who's able to get around Schmelzer and then play a ball into the path of Lukebakio, who runs around Diallo, because the pass is played across Diallo. Now he's able to break forward, but Akanji's pressure sees Lukebakio take a poor first touch, and the ball ends up going out of play. But again, you see it, a pass into midfield, intercepted, and they're so quick to break in transition, and that's a big warning sign. One of the other chances prior to the goal it shows the strength of Fink, because he's able to attack a ball, and what happens there is that you see from the aerial duel, Akanji and Piszczek both run for it. They both attack it. He's able to win the challenge and play the loose ball into Usam. He's able to break forward on goal, but he fires his shot wide of the net when he's able to break into left half space. That's a big chance for Dusseldorf. You expect them to convert there, but it doesn't happen. The final chance that we get prior to the build-up to the goal, we see Diallo step forward. He pushes all the way in and tries to find Gotha, but Kaminsky steps in. The ball ends up hitting off Diallo and falling to Zimmer. Now Zimmer's able to play that pass. Who we have at center back is Witsel covering for Diallo, who stepped very high into the final third. And we see Lukebakio break into that space. As he breaks into that space, Witsel now has to track him, and it's 1v1, and he locates Zimmer, making the run into the box. He plays into Zimmer, but a sliding tackle prevents Zimmer from poking that effort on goal. But when you think about those chances, they are all warning signs that lead up to the goal. But when we get to that opener, it stems from the same pathway that they've been getting by the Dortmund backline. It's a throw in into Larsen. Larsen gets the ball, and he's stepped to by Sobotka, who intercepts the ball, and you get Stoger on it, and he instantly sees the space in between the Dortmund center backs, and he plays into Lukebakio, who finally breaks free on goal, 1v1 with Berkey, and he finishes his opportunity. Such swift transitions, quick interchanging of the ball, and just instantly dumping it into Lukebakio to break into the channels or in behind. It's something you'd see from Dortmund, just with probably a bit more passes and a bit more technically savvy, but here they played a bit more direct. They used Lukebakio's pace to their advantage, and they exploited Dortmund's fragile backline. We look to one more opportunity. Rensing punt into the Dortmund half. Again, you see Fink winning an aerial duel over Delaney, which then leads to Stoger picking up the ball and storming past Schmelzer, and he now waits for the overlapping run of Zimmer with Diallo coming across. What happens now is that Zimmer is able to play a superb cross around Akanji into the 6-yard box for Usami breaking in, free on goal with an open net, but he guides his effort wide. When you break down Dusseldorf's chances, Lukebakio's pace, the fact they're able to win balls in midfield due to their great organization, and the fact that they were compact, and the fact that you have Fink who could win aerial duels and then play in his teammates were pivotal to what Dusseldorf did right, and Dortmund had no answers because they couldn't break them down, and frankly, them going forward, they left their center backs vulnerable, and that's one of their weaknesses if you were to find one or identify one in Lucien Favre's side. So now let's get to the second half, see how Dortmund looked to try and chase the game and how Dusseldorf were able to close it out. So the start of the second half saw Toprak replace Akanji at the back four. What we did see at the start of the second half was one particular incident where Dusseldorf kind of stepped out of position, and for the most part they were very organized, stuck man-to-man in midfield, protected the wide areas, and if they were interchanging around those central zones, they were able to cope with it. Here, we did see Sabatka pinch on Diallo, and what happens there is that it frees up space for Witsel to finally get on the ball. As Witsel now gets on the ball, what happens is that you have Stoger in that holding midfield role, so now he has to step to Witsel to try and close him down. With Götze dropping off and pulling out the other center back, and Zimmerman stuck on Brun Larsen, what that does leave is space for Royce to drive across Kaminsky, and with the space in between Götze pulling out Aran, what happens there is that the pass is played in, but what's good is that Kaminsky tracked him well and was able to hold them off. On another occasion, that possibly could have led to a goal-scoring opportunity, but just goes to show that one simple mistake, one little pinch could lead to a breakdown that results in a goal-scoring opportunity. Besides that, we did see Dusseldorf double their lead. It was Zimmer with a cracking effort. Nothing really stemmed from it, just a simple throw-in that saw Usami spin his runner and switch the ball over to him, and he fired a cracker that Berkey had no chance of saving. Eventually, that did lead to a tactical switch. We saw Sancho come on, we saw Paco Alcacer come on, and what happened is that now you had more of a 4-1-4-1 with Witsel sitting at the base, and you had Götze and you had Royce just in behind Paco. But what we did see is that if they were both to drop off, it still doesn't change the fact that it's man v man in midfield. And that was something that Dortmund obviously didn't want. Sometimes we'd see Royce push forward, and then that would lead them to having the two center backs occupied, and you have Götze drop off a bit deeper and try to drive forward. Royce tried to do the same thing, but when they did pick up the ball in these central zones, what happened was that they were so organized, Dusseldorf, that it didn't really matter because they compressed the space in between the lines. The gap between the midfield bank and the defensive bank was so concise that no one could really operate in those zones without being forced into a tackle or oppressed by another opposition. So we would see Royce kind of push off, and that didn't really matter because then they're still cutting off the supply line. Actually, once these changes were made, we saw Sancho move over to the right, we saw Pulisic move over to the left, but there was no real impact in terms of the overall gameplay of Dortmund. We saw actually Dusseldorf create more chances. They obviously had the outlet for Lukebakio if you want to drive into those positions, but that never really worked out. He could play with his back to goal and win fouls like he did in the first half, but their chances came from simple errors. It was one where it was a loose Pulisic touch. And what happens there is that Zimmer is able to nod the ball over Diallo, and it falls to Lukebakio, who picks it up, but Toprak comes off to kind of press him off a bit, and he fires a shot at the keeper. And then another opportunity from a simple throw-in from Zimmerman. It falls to Stoger ahead of the back four, and he's able to drive at goal, not picked up, and he fires a shot inches wide of the net. Eventually, we saw Bodzek replace Sabatka and move into that midfield, and eventually we did see Dortmund get their goal. But again, even that stemmed from a moment of individual brilliance. It's Sancho getting away from Bodzek, getting away from Usami, and playing a ball in behind Stoger for who we see Piszczek making the run, overlapping run to the byline, and he's able to locate Paco Alcacer, who nods a great effort past the keeper from point-blank range. But besides that, Dortmund struggled to create chances. Dusseldorf were excellent on the day, worthy of 3 points, and now it sees Dortmund drop points for the first time in the Bundesliga in terms of losing a game, and it does give hope for Gladbach and Bayern Munich. But let me know what you guys think. Can Dusseldorf finish in the top half this season? And what about Dortmund? They've lost their first game of the season, and if they were to lose against Gladbach, prior to the winter break, this could lead to an exciting Bundesliga title race. Because are Dortmund still the favorites? Could Gladbach and Bayern fight back? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.